This is a production of Cornell University.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're going to hear legal stuff at the end of the day. I'm going to try to keep this a little breezy. I mean, what you've heard was from your public officials all sorts of excitement about the opportunities. You heard actually really fascinating information from the researchers and the scientists about what they're doing, really interesting stuff about the farmers. Now I can get to talk about regulations. But I don't think of them as regulations, really. I think really it's just creating an environment, hopefully a safe environment, given that the Farm Bill essentially creates carve-outs to work in this area and leaves it to the state to develop a program either through its own research program or through educational institutions to establish programs which permit the research and study of this plant. And what we're attempting to do is listen to the folks who are interested in it, listen to the industry's needs, and try to form a program that addresses the needs of industry to study and research and create a base when things hopefully change in Washington so that this industry can really launch and grow. So that's sort of what we're up to, and it's an iterative process. I mean, I've been at the agency for about 4 years, and I think we're on our third set of regulations in industrial hemp, which is a lot of regulatory work. What we're currently in the process of doing now is taking what we've built on and expanding it so that our essentially private partners have rules of the game. We've adopted program regulations in connection with the 6 sites which were available under our current law. As you've heard, we've now, well, with current legislative session, we've essentially eliminated that 10-site limitation. So there's a large opportunity for people who are interested in the area to make application to the department to engage in the study and research of industrial hemp. And the range of, I guess the range of research is almost as broad as the huge number of applications for this particular product. So while we're in the ag department, we often think about agronomic research. I mean, it goes from agronomic research to studying cultivars, growing conditions, but it also involves market research and production. So it's an entire array of possibilities, some of which we are quite familiar with, and some of which we haven't traditionally been involved in. So it's a learning process on our part. One of the fun things about listening to all these panelists is a lot of it, you're sort of going, yeah, I learned that. But there's so much more to learn. So from the legal side, it's a really exciting area because it both exposes your knowledge base and also your profound ignorance about what can happen. So it's sort of like a lot of fun because, one, a lot of the things we see and that the department has been done over time. And it's a building effort, and we're dealing with structures that already have been created. This is a new opportunity. It's a new program. So you can form it and mold it and try to make it work as efficiently as possible, which is both challenging and exciting. So it's interesting for me. Hopefully it's interesting and useful for you. And I can't emphasize how important it is to get input from the folks who are there in the fields doing the research, doing the growing, and getting information because, I mean, regulations are just really rules of the game. So we try to create certainty and clarity. Everyone knows what's going on, and you can perform in a relatively easy environment because what's required is clear, and it addresses sort of your needs. So saying all of that, I'll give you a breezy introduction to what our program currently looks like and essentially will look like, because it's pretty simple. Notwithstanding, the challenge is we're working in a murky federal environment. So you've got transitioning where you've got carve-outs under the federal farm bill. You've got additional supplements in connection with the omnibus budget bill, which expands sort of the range and scope of these activities, but they're not particularly fleshed out. You've got uncertainty at the federal regulatory level. When you speak to the agencies, they're sort of tentative in their approach because it's new to them, and the states are the ones who are really developing these programs. So in some ways, we have lots of opportunity, but in a certain sense, we're also on our own in trying to develop programs that serve the needs of the industry and serves the needs of the public. And that's sort of what we're up to. So essentially, currently, we've got a research program. We're accepting private partners. We also work with educational institutions. But generally, our approach to both of these entities is pretty much the same. You've got an application process. The application is fairly straightforward, and the information that is required is fairly directed. We obviously, as required by law, require disclosure of the sites. We are looking for research proposals because ultimately our pilot projects are pilot projects for research and study. So when Dan tells us you got to be thoughtful and you've got to plan, that's true in terms of your approach to this agency as well. Because what we're looking for is a thoughtful plan as to what areas you would like to work in and develop, which contributes to the knowledge and the development of this particular industry. But it's research and study-based, and it also needs to be appropriately scaled to the project that you're proposing. So, I mean, we've had suggestions in our regulations about agronomic research and marketing research, but essentially what you really need to do to have a successful application is to think about what you want to research, what areas can be developed, and then make the proposal to the agency, and we're pretty flexible. But you need to develop that. It's got to be serious. It's got to be thoughtful. And if it is, then chances are you're going to be reviewed favorably. You also need to think about security issues. Now, security issues from our experience has been sort of interesting. When we first embarked upon looking at regulations, there was a huge security concern. And we were thinking that we really needed a very structured approach to the kind of security that was necessary for folks cultivating industrial hemp. And as we learned more about other states' experience and other growers' experience, we had a much softer approach. And currently, while you need a security plan, the security plan needs to be a sensible one. You need to consider what kind of access there is to the plants being grown or access to the facility. And we don't have any specific requirements, but what you really need to do is assess the risks that you may have in connection with security issues, and then adopt appropriate responses to those risks. So it's a more flexible approach. It's not a top-down, you've got to fence your growing areas, you've got to have a particular kind of signage, but it's more of an iterative process where you think about what your problems could be and how do you address them. And that's sort of the approach we've taken. I'd also mention that the scale is important. We're talking about demonstration projects. So that doesn't necessarily need to be really, really tiny, but it needs to be appropriately scaled. So what you're researching is appropriate to the amount you're going to be cultivating. There are obviously issues in connection with what we do in evaluating. I mean, basically, we will be looking at background checks, and we will be looking at past experience. It was sort of interesting in our discussions with other state agencies. This was an area that people identified, yeah, there's a concern here. We had applicants who had all sorts of issues, be it regulatory or otherwise. So you need to be mindful and make sure that the folks you partner with in research are responsible individuals, and that's sort of what we're looking for. So, there are requirements for disclosure, and you take a look at that. We basically requiring our partners to enter into partnership agreements or research partner agreements, and basically that's your roadmap. You're going to have a regulatory structure which gives you sort of like the general marks you need to hit. In connection with what's expected of you as a research partner, That's dealt with in our research partner agreement, and basically what that does is it ties you to a scope of work. So basically, you undertake to conduct a project, and we expect you to adhere to that project. It's flexible enough to modify as you're going on, so that if you want to go into related areas, you can, but if it's a separate research project, then you'll have to do a separate application, but there's flexible. It provides for, disclosures and vetting. It makes clear that once you get a permit, that it's not a transferable permit. It permits subcontracting. We have reporting requirements. So, basically, if you're involved in a project, there'll be annual reporting requirements providing data. But at the same time, our research partnership agreement protects your intellectual property. That which you develop is yours, and we make it clear that it's yours. So that's covered in our agreement. We deal with testing regimens and procedures to make sure that it is indeed, when you get it, it's industrial hemp, and when you grow it, it's industrial hemp. One of the useful things for us in connection with sitting through this summit, we heard issues with respect to hot seed. And that's something that we probably need to take a closer look at, because this is a new issue that, I don't know if Chris had seen it, but it was a new issue for me. And it's something that we deal with in our partnership agreements, but it's something I think we maybe want to kick the tires a little better on. We deal with security. So that's sort of the structure of our program. It was the structure of our program before. It's a little bit more formalized now. And that's sort of where we are. One of the things I would encourage you all to do, because we will be formulating regulations, and there's a lot of public comment, and we look forward to that comment, both once we publish regulations, we get comment, but even now, before they get published, give me a call, talk to us. If there are issues we need to focus on, you are the best folks to advise of what those issues are, because you're working in the field. Hey, I'm just a lawyer. And I can create clear regulations, I can create clear rules, but basically it's your knowledge base that helps me get to a position where everyone knows what's going on, and we can do a program that works for you, because ultimately that's what our job is, to create a clear set of rules that you can understand and you can follow, and creates a space for you to operate that won't run into problems with federal authorities. And that's what I've got to say.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. So I think the one thing that I would reiterate, I don't have a great deal to add to what Scott has talked about this afternoon on the regulations, but I think going forward, one of the things I'd like to reiterate, which Scott brought up, is the importance of, in the application process and in the regulation, the importance of formulating the research questions and articulating that in a clear way to us. Up until now, this has been a program where we had a limitation of 10 permits, and there has been the ability to have a great deal of interaction with applicants, and also the ability to have us, when we get an application and we have questions, to call people and clarify. And I think as this goes forward, based upon the interest that I've seen here today and the number of phone calls I've had, as we go forward and this becomes a higher volume program for us, if you will, it's going to be very, very important that when the research or when the applications come into us, that the research questions are well thought out. And I guess one of the things that I would throw out there to people, as well as Scott and myself and other staff at Ag and Markets being available, to help, is also the folks who have sort of gone before, whether they're the Morrisville folks or the Cornell people or the cooperative extension people out there, who can help you to formulate a good research question and get a strong proposal into us. It takes the same amount of effort to look at something that's strong and well written versus something that perhaps is not as strong. So I think that's going to be really important as the volume of the program increases.
All right, we're going to entertain one question because we're running up against the end of our lease time here in this space. But one question that producers have been asking is, and I think it's a valid question, does growing hemp negate the ability to participate in any other federal programs, given the federal rules about growing cannabis?
An interesting question. I don't practice in the area, so I will give you a non-legal response which doesn't bind the agency. This is just my opinion.
There's the lawyer coming out, right?
Under the federal farm bill, a carve-out was created. It authorizes these programs. My approach or my thought would be, in that you have a specific federal carve-out, it would be inappropriate for a federal agency to tell you that this is going to disqualify you from other available federal programs. That's just my personal analysis of it. The federal agencies may beg to differ, but that's just where I am.
Awesome. Chris, any last thoughts? All right, a round of applause for these two, please. We've had a great day here, I think. It was a great morning. It was a great afternoon. We've had great panels. I think hopefully you've learned at least as much as I've come to understand. I think we heard a couple of things. So one, we heard the need to go forward in a collaborative manner, the need for state agencies to have kind of a uniform protocol. And I'm thinking, in my case, of Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, Department of Justice, and frankly, our funding partners at Empire State Development as well. I think we heard about the need for continued research, applied research, about varieties, about fertility, about utilizing the right equipment, the right cultural methods. What does this mean for rotations? There's all kinds of questions that we have, which frankly kind of conjures up in my mind integrated plant science. Isn't that what we're talking about here? A little plug for Cornell there. I think we heard a little bit, or quite a lot, about the need for federal advocacy to help lift that cloud that we're still operating under, addressed in that last question. And I'm going to borrow a little bit from something that Dan Dalgen from JD Farm said this morning. I think we need the correct interaction between all the state agencies and our partners. I think we need the leadership here at the land grant system, as we've evidenced today quite a lot. The leadership from the industry, which I think is certainly clear to me here from this meeting today and exemplified in our panels, but also the leadership at the state level, which I think we've clearly demonstrated by the participation of our lieutenant governor and by the governor's actions in this new opportunity. And you combine that with a vision, and I think it needs to be a common vision that we all share and that we stay close to. So with that, let me just say we're committed to that. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participation, for your energy, for your passion about all of this. A special thank you to our legislative partners who have helped with the legislation to make this possible. And certainly a special thank you to our hosts here today at Cornell for putting up with us all day long and for their continued partnership. So with that, thank you all for attending the very first Hemp Summit in New York State.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.